Modern psychiatry borrows its vocabulary heavily from engineering. When someone is struggling, we often hear their distress described as a chemical imbalance, faulty circuitry, or a defective process. Viewing the mind as a mechanism has delivered undeniable benefits. It gave us reproducible treatment protocols, a common clinical vocabulary, and effective pharmacological tools to manage severe symptoms. But treating the mind purely as a machine carries a cost. A person navigating a difficult passage can imperceptibly become a repair object. Their context, the relational, cultural, and embodied dimensions of their suffering, falls away because the mechanical model has no grammar for them. A growing movement called liberation psychiatry starts from a different premise. This framework moves past the idea that the mind is a broken machine that simply malfunctions. It treats the mind as a dynamic, living watershed. Consciousness pools, flows, floods, and evaporates. It responds directly to the terrain of the body, memory, and the outside world. Every mind contains a capacity for stillness and internal reflection. We can think of this as the pool, the space where we observe our own thoughts and gather experience into a coherent self. When a person experiences chronic stress, trauma, or adverse environments, silt accumulates. The water becomes turbid. The capacity for reflection contracts because the conditions required for stillness have been systematically denied. Human beings are also rivers. This is the kinetic dimension of lived experience, the energy, desire, and grief moving through our bodies and out into the world. An acute crisis behaves like a torrent, surging over structural boundaries. Dissociation looks like a diversion, the river going underground, disconnected from the surface. Severe depression acts like a dam, where emotional energy accumulates without an outlet, and the landscape above stagnates. Across all these states, the water itself is rarely defective. The crisis is a response to overwhelming pressure, a collapsed boundary, or a blocked channel. If an individual is a river, they exist within a larger water cycle. What shows up in a clinic as one person's distress is often the local precipitation of larger meteorological patterns. Families, workplaces, and societal institutions form the built infrastructure of our collective hydrology. They dictate how emotional water should flow, where it is contained, and what counts as a flood. You can see this collective flow in crowds. Emotion, whether it's fear, grief, or shared joy, propagates through a group like a pressure wave. The field generates an emotional climate that shapes the individuals inside it. We cannot fully map a psychological crisis by looking solely inside a single patient. We have to map the larger societal and environmental weather systems they are navigating. A hydrological approach changes the goal of psychiatric medication. Instead of focusing on the correction of a brain defect, we focus on the dynamics of the flow itself. Pharmacology acts as a modulator. It adjusts the fluid pressure, reduces the turbulence, and temporarily strengthens the banks so a person can safely do the work of navigating their own terrain. This model also provides a place for artificial intelligence. Patients today generate an atmosphere of data, diffuse signals from voice patterns, sensor streams, and digital behaviors that usually evaporate into the background. AI functions as an atmospheric condenser. It gathers these scattered droplets of information and turns them into a visible pattern, a dense clinical insight that assists the human clinician. Whether we are prescribing a pill or deploying an algorithm, these tools must serve one purpose: amplifying relational human care, never replacing it. Quiet focus. All of this vast theory ultimately lands in the intimate scale of a quiet consulting room between a clinician and a patient. The defining language of this framework actually came from one of those rooms. After hearing her distress described not as a defect, but as a river without enough boundaries, a patient offered 3 words: build the banks. Clinicians often feel pressured to stop the flood or treat the water as inherently flawed. A different mandate involves collaboratively mapping the terrain to see why the water has nowhere to go. Building the banks means establishing real, physical, and relational structures. It means securing safe housing, restoring sleep, repairing relationships, and creating community support. These banks give the flow depth and direction. Success in liberation psychiatry looks like active human flourishing. a dynamic watershed that recovers from disturbance and keeps moving. We don't need to treat the mind as a broken machine. We can build the banks, let the water clear, and restore the flow.